Welcome to the webinar. My name is Melissa Varga. I'm the Community Manager for the Science Network at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I want to thank you for joining us today as we talk about planning your scientific career, paths in public engagement and science policy. Today we're going to hear from 3 speakers who have navigated their own career paths in public engagement and policy and have also taken significant strides in guiding others who are interested in these types of science careers. We'll hear from each of the speakers, and then there will be time for questions and answers at the end. And make sure you stay all the way till the end when our speakers will offer one final piece of advice for early career scientists. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we dive in. If you'd like to follow the conversation online, we're going to be using the hashtag SciNetWorkshop. We'll make sure to send that out in the chat box as well. And the Science Network handle is @SciNetUCS. We'll be tweeting live. And you can send us your questions throughout the presentation by typing them into the chat box, and then we will pass those along to the presenters. So at this point, I'm going to pass it off to our first presenter, Melanie Roberts, who's the founder and executive director of the Emerging Leaders in Science and Society program, also called ELIS, at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really thrilled to see people are on this webinar. It's encouraging to see how many scientists and engineers out there really care about making a difference beyond the bench and beyond their discipline for their communities in the world. And not sure how many of you are graduate students, but I actually started getting involved in public and policy engagement when I was a graduate student in neuroscience and studying stem cells. And so that was the issue that sucked me in to begin with. And I decided by my second year in graduate school I wanted to go into science policy, did a AAAS fellowship right after that, and worked then on science policy in a university. Now I guess I would call myself a social entrepreneur in science policy because I started with a couple of other former AAAS fellows, ELIS. And ELIS is a service learning program for graduate students that helps them to improve their capacity for engagement by putting you right out there on, to work on a real challenge with students in other disciplines and with community members. This year we've got 18 fellows at 5 campuses who are working with their communities to look at the safety and sustainability of drinking water. So today I just wanted to share a few tips with you from what I've learned from doing engagement myself, what I've learned from being a congressional fellow working as a policymaker in DC and hearing other people try to engage me, things that our fellows have learned, and also I'm going to start with some of the things that researchers have learned about what makes information useful to other people, because these are really the questions that you want to be asking yourself as you think about what topics you're going to engage on and how. So one of the things that I want to point out is, so the question, what makes information useful? And most of us think, scientists included, that if we just give people more and better information, they'll make better decisions. But this is actually simply not true. Researchers have shown this. You might have heard the term confirmation bias, which means if you already have an opinion about something, that you pay attention to the information that supports what you already think. And many, many studies have shown that giving people more information about a topic they already might have an opinion on, or especially a polarized issue, even if you give them high quality, unbiased information, it makes them more likely to dig into their own existing position. So what we're doing, which is what this scientist is doing, giving more information, really doesn't work to help people make decisions. And actually, I would encourage you to read the work of Dan Kahan. He's a professor of law and psychology at Yale for more information. That's spelled K-A-H-A-N if you want to look it up. And I just wanted to summarize 4 things that researchers have found that really does make information useful. So one thing that I use information if it's relevant to my situation. So if I just adopted a dog or a child, I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to child or pet health. And like just yesterday, I was doing a lot of research on carbon tax and transportation options because those are on my ballot in November. So you pay attention to information that's relevant to you. So when you're engaging, make sure you're engaging with people on a topic they really care about at a time when they're thinking about it. Next is I use information if it's from a trusted source, right? So you can think about the same information if it were presented to you by somebody you really trust and you think shares your values, somebody you might not trust as much and you don't think shares your values. What are you going to accept, right? So you're going to have to give me a lot more evidence for me to use the information from somebody or a source that I don't normally go to. So when you're engaging, make sure that you're building trust with people and that you're working with people and sources that they trust. It's really important. Trust is, I would say, the most important key to good engagement. I also use information if I believe it's developed by credible means. I'm not going to believe it if I think that the methodology was flawed or maybe somebody generated it who had a conflict of interest. Luckily, this is one area where you as scientists can really help because the scientific method and peer review, while not perfect, they're generally accepted as credible means for producing information, and you can actually help other people judge the credibility of information that they're receiving. And finally, the fourth thing I use information if I think that it takes my needs into account. So for example, if there's a study that just included men, I am less likely to pay attention to the recommendations as a woman. Or if there are recommendations about something that are developed by rural homeowners and I'm a city renter, I'm not going to pay as much attention. So I really want to know that whatever information has considered people like me and are taking my needs into account. And this is all, these four things are from decision sciences, which you can take whole classes on. But for now, I'm going to move on to a second question that I think everybody needs to be thinking about as they're getting started in public and policy engagement, and that is, what hat are you going to wear? What role do you want to play in science policy? And there are four types of roles that I'm going to talk about, and they're all really critical. One isn't better than the other. It's just that which one you choose depends on your personality, your expertise, and your interests. So the first is expert advisor, so the E=mc² hat. You might be, for example, an expert on electricity grids, and you can go around and teach policymakers and regulators and people who are paying their electricity bills about how energy generation and transmission and distribution work. But you would focus really on the science as an expert advisor. You wouldn't get into the economics and the politics, and you certainly wouldn't advocate for particular sources of energy. You would just help people understand how the science worked. The second hat is called honest broker. There's actually a book by Roger Pilkey Jr. called Honest Broker. And honest brokers are in between. They go beyond just the science to consider the stakeholder interests and help to develop options for action that integrate both the best science and the stakeholder interests. One group, one organization that acts like an honest broker is the National Academies. They do these big reports where they gather input from multiple people and multiple disciplines, and they usually give a range of recommendations for things like having a sustainable energy future or different health policy. The last two roles are advocate roles, which are also really critical. And there are two types of advocates that you can consider, and none of these roles are exclusive. You might wear different hats at different times. But one is science. The science advocate. As science advocates, you're out there promoting science. You're sharing how great it is. You're showing how many benefits it has for the world. And you're asking people to support it and fund it. It's really important that we have science advocates out there because people who spend money on science need to know where it goes and be able to articulate the benefits of it. And the other type of advocate is the issue advocate for other things. So it's kind of science for policy. So this is the Save the Whales hat. Your issue might be saving the whales, it might be vaccinations, it might be something else. But as a scientist, this is something that any citizen in a democracy, we hope they're advocating for certain things. And as a scientist, you have the ability to bring high quality information to the conversation. So again, these roles are all really important. You might play different ones at different times. But it's really important, I think, to be clear with yourself and with the people that you're working with which of these hats you're wearing, because there are some pitfalls of engagement. And I'll just name 4 of the most common ones that I think are important to watch out for as you work with the community or with policymakers. The first one is that stakeholders sometimes don't understand scientists. And that could be because you haven't told them what hat you're wearing, and they think you're coming in as just the scientific expert, and you start advocating for something, and they might be confused, or it might hurt trust. Scientists don't understand the stakeholders. When I was a congressional staffer, a lot of people would come asking for things that either we weren't able to do because we weren't on the right committee or the issue wasn't on the table. And they also often didn't understand the trade-offs of things that they were asking for. So when you're working with Congress or with your community, do some background research and talk to people about their situation and how their process works. That's really important. Another common engagement pitfall is cherry-picking data. And cherry-picking means that you present data that supports a particular point of view. And so this is something that you normally wouldn't do as an honest broker. You would want to show information that supports different points of view. However, advocates, just ask any marketing person, advocates don't normally present both sides. Advocates actually really do cherry-pick data that present a certain point of view. And so that can be hard for some scientists because you want to present all views. What I would do when I was helping my senator advocate for something is I would put the data that supported our view in the talking points, but I would write him another memo and say, I just wanted you to know about this other data as well that may not be as persuasive, or another side might even use. So I tried to present all the data to the decision maker. And then finally, it's hard to present information in a useful format. So for example, if I want to eat more healthfully and you give me a huge list of nutrition information on a bunch of ingredients, it's going to be really hard for me to make the leap to actually eating more healthfully. What I'd really love is somebody who is an expert in nutrition and who understands my dietary needs and my budget coming up with some recipes for me. So figuring out how to present information in a way that's actually actionable is really important. And then finally, I just want to encourage you to dive right in, like doing science in the lab or swimming. Engagement is an activity that you can't learn just from reading about it. So go do it, get out there, learn through experience, and ask others for feedback. And with that, thank you for listening, and I will hand it back to Melissa.
Thank you, Melanie. That was a great overview of getting yourself in the mindset for various types of policy and public engagement opportunities. Again, this is Melissa Varga, the Community Manager at the Science Network at UCS. Today's webinar is about planning for career paths in policy and public engagement. And now to dive more deeply into exploring these types of career and professional development opportunities, we're going to hear from Yaihara Fortis-Santiago, the Science Alliance Director at the New York Academy of Sciences. Take it away, Yaihara.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to be sharing a little bit of my career path. And I think Melanie did an excellent job laying everything down in terms of advocate and policy and communication. So I'm going to focus on career strategies and career tips on how to transition from academia to non-academic jobs, in this case in public engagement and policy. So I'll start with my slides. I cannot switch them here. So Melissa, if you could help me switch them, for some reason I can't.
Sure, I'll move them forward for you.
All right, thank you. So I'm currently the Director of the Science Alliance at the New York Academy of Sciences, but how did I get here? Next. So I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I did my bachelor's at the University of Puerto Rico in biology, and then I joined the PhD program in neuroscience at Brandeis University. I'm the first person in my family to get a PhD or a higher degree for that matter. And when I was a graduate student at Brandeis, I was very interested in exploring things beyond the bench. And I always engaged in extracurricular activities that allowed me to develop other communication skills, interpersonal skills. And for me, it was very important that I balance out my scientific work with extracurricular activities. So towards the end of my PhD, I already knew that I was going to defend. I started looking for other careers, and I discovered the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. And I applied for the fellowship, and I was very fortunate to become a fellow in 2012, right after my PhD. So I only spent a few months in the lab between when I applied for the fellowship and when I was accepted. And then I worked at the National Science Foundation as a fellow. And after that, I joined the academy. Next. So during my tenure as a AAAS fellow at the National Science Foundation, I switched offices. My first year, I worked in the Directorate of Engineering in a portfolio that was called Emerging Frontiers in Research and Innovation. In that portfolio, I had the chance to see how interdisciplinary and cutting-edge research is conducted from a grant side. It was a very exciting opportunity. And then on my second year, I joined the international office at the NSF, where I helped with the Americas portfolio. And towards the end of my fellowship, I went to Mexico to help with the ICOR program launching in Mexico. And I basically networked with someone that works here at the New York Academy of Sciences, and I learned about opportunities for positions at the academy, and I was recruited like shortly after that encounter, and I was recruited as the manager for the Science Alliance, and I was recently promoted to director. And the program that I direct, the Science Alliance, is a professional development branch of the New York Academy of Sciences. We have about 7,000 early career scientists, and these are postdocs, graduate students, undergraduates, and junior faculty that come to us because they want to develop professional skills to become strong professionals or stronger professionals. And we try to cover a different career path. We provide help with academia, also industry, consulting, science communication, policy. So most of my job on a regular basis, it's about contacting people who could facilitate these kind of workshops or events. And there are 4 pillars for professional development in the Science Alliance, and these are skills development, career exploration, training, and networking. The program has been running for about 13 years, so we have had a lot of opportunity to understand what are the needs of early career scientists. Next. And now I want to talk a little bit about how I did the transition myself, because I was a graduate student a few years ago, and when I started doing career exploration, I wasn't sure what path I was going to follow. But I was not only building my scientific credentials by making sure that I have strong publications and a strong publication record, but I also was doing oral and poster presentations in several conferences a year. So those credentials were very important when I applied for the AAAS fellowship, because they are looking for very strong scientists that are going to join the program. And I also was doing a lot of outreach and recruitment. I had the chance to recruit students at 2 major conferences that focus on minority students. One is the Society for Advancing Chicanos and Native Americans in Sciences, SACNES, and the other one is the Annual Biomedical Research Conference for minority students. These two are the major conference for underrepresented minority students to present their research and find networking opportunities. And through those opportunities, I myself start to understand a little bit about what opportunities were out there and what were my interests. So the other thing that I was currently doing towards the end of my PhD, I engaged with a non-for-profit organization called Ciencia Puerto Rico, and I started producing articles for lay audiences. So I was building my science communication skills. So all of these credentials together, my scientific skills, my communication skills, and all the other extracurricular activities made me a very strong candidate to transition into a job, or in this case, into the fellowship outside the academia. Next. So I want to share with you, this is a question that I think we're going to have a chance to add more information into later on. But people, a lot of grad students and postdocs come to me and ask me, what are the skills that are valued outside academia? And this is a short list, of course. I will start with communication skills. Melanie did an excellent job explaining the different hats that you wear in the policy world. So it's important that you can communicate. And you can communicate to different audiences in different contexts and with different people at different levels. Also working in teams. When I was a fellow, one of the most important things, and that was very important for my position, was being part of a team and being able to work in a team. And this is something that scientists do pretty well in labs. Also in policy and public engagement, you're going to have to be very adaptable and flexible. Especially in policy, priorities change all the time in different agencies, in different offices. So you have to be able to adapt to new situations and also to let go your personal opinions in order to defend or advocate for those opinions of their agency or office that you are representing. And the last two are negotiation, leadership, and of course interpersonal skills. I think for me this is a perfect package for someone that wants to transition from academia to a policy or a public engagement position. And the last slide. So the last slide for me, it's about what kind of opportunities are out there for people that are interested in getting trained or transition into positions in policy or public engagement. For policy, there is a very long list in the resources page in AAAS, but you could do fellowships. You could work in the government by doing details or internships. There are a lot of unpaid and paid opportunities in the federal government to do internships. I will also agree with Melanie in terms of getting experience as a graduate student in policy and advocacy work. And the last one is network. It's very important that you start networking with a lot in order to understand what's out there, especially in the Washington, D.C., where most of the policy is happening. It's very important that you are very good at the networking, etc. And the last slide here before we transition, these are just a handful of opportunities for fellowships. I think Ashley is going to be mentioned some of these in more depth, so I'm going to pass it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Yaihara. It was great to hear about those skills and professional development opportunities and to get an idea of some of the fellowships that are out there. And as you said, you set me up perfectly. Our final speaker is Ashley Huderson. She's an adjunct professor at the University of the District of Columbia, and she's a current AAAS fellow. She's going to share with us some recommendations for fellowships and resources to get you started in science policy. Thanks, Ashley.
Hi, thank you. As Melissa mentioned, I'm going to go through some resources as well as kind of the path I took to get to my current position, and I'll take you through the steps to help you kind of weave a story in case anyone's background doesn't necessarily flow directly what you think you have to do to start a career in public policy or public engagement. So as mentioned, I'm a second-year AAAS fellow, and I'm currently stationed at the National Science Foundation. I work in the Engineering Directorate, Engineering Education Centers, and I specifically work on broadening participation work for the engineering field. So how did I get here? I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I have a bachelor's in chemistry from Spelman College. While at Spelman, I was really interested in chemistry and science, and I didn't really think past the bachelor's degree. So while I was in undergrad, through different experiences in terms of internships or funded programs at Spelman, I was exposed to different levels of science, which prompted me to pursue a PhD in biomedical research from Yaihara Medical College. While in graduate school, I realized that I loved science, I loved talking about science, I loved being around science, but I didn't necessarily want to be at the bench doing science. So for me, it was about finding opportunities that would let me pursue those interests and take me maybe away from the bench. At the time, there weren't a lot of opportunities, and they were called alternative careers. So for me, it took a little more digging. Yaihara had an opportunity with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that I found myself taking advantage of, which you'll hear me stress taking advantage of opportunities as I go through my presentation, because that's really going to be the key to exposure, as well as helping you to see different things and land in different places that may not have been ideal in terms of your trajectory. So after Yaihara, I took a postdoc at Georgetown in the Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities Research. Here, it was more of an epidemiology environment where I was allowed to run clinical trials. Very different from my PhD, which worked with animals and mouse models, but it allowed me to step more into an arena working with people, and there was a lot more policy around health disparities and minority health, which also introduced me and brought me further into the policy realm. From there, I decided that I really, really wanted to do policy. So during my postdoc, I began to adjunct, and in adjuncting, I was exposed to a lot of people who had questions about science. They couldn't understand how to do it while I was doing it. And that helped me realize that I, again, enjoyed talking about science, explaining science, and helping to shape what scientists look like, but I didn't necessarily want to be at the bench. So for me, the next opportunity was something that would allow me to explore that policy interest, help me utilize my bench training, and just be able to sit at the table when we're talking about policy issues related to science. So for me, that was the AAAS fellowship at the National Science Foundation. Currently, I work with broadening participation in engineering and STEM-related fields. So my role is to try to help to create a more diverse and inclusive environment for undergrad, graduate, postdocs, and faculty. I've also worked on some solicitations from NSF, which include the broadening participation in engineering, and NSF includes. So moving from the bench to my policy work here at NSF, my learning curve was very steep, and it was a different field. So there were a lot of things that I needed to do personally to really catch up in terms of reading and understanding and doing searches and talking to people. So as you begin to transition maybe from bench training and trying to step into the policy world, you want to network, which my other colleagues have mentioned, so that you can really get an idea of what's going on. So informational interviews allow you to go out and reach people. You can email people, and everyone loves to talk about their work and how they got there, and it gives you an idea of different paths that you may be able to take. When I was trying to figure out where to go after my postdoc, I was averaging 2 to 3 informational interviews a month with people who were doing things that I thought were interesting, but I didn't necessarily have the detail behind their day-to-day, and it helped me solidify what my interests were to expand my list of what I was interested in possibly doing. So AAAS was not the only fellowship I applied to. It's the one that I felt best fit my needs. But there are other fellowships. There are some that are popular, and I have them listed here. There's a version of the California Council on Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, which is modeled after AAAS here in D.C. There's NCI, and there are a host of other fellowships that are centered around taking bench scientists and exposing them to policy work so that you can understand what it involves and see if that's something that you're still interested in. And they all pay very well. There are also some resources to tap into to search and see what's available. So here I have science.gov. There's a whole listing of undergrad and graduate opportunities in terms of internships, fellowships that are broken down based on your different interests and your field of study. STEMcareer.com is also a resource that gives you insight into different career options for STEM scholars. And there's also STEMconnector.org, and these are just a few examples of sites that are set up with a host of information when you have questions or you're trying to figure out what are options to pursue. I also encourage everyone to look into societies such as the American Society for Cell Biology, just different societies based on your discipline that have a policy section that they're looking for people to come and intern. Some of them are paid, some of them are unpaid, but there's a host of opportunities. Universities also have websites that have internships as well as paid roles and unpaid roles for you to really engulf yourself in the policy world to see how you can take your STEM training and really utilize it in this new arena. So from there, I'm going to pass it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Ashley, and thank you to all of our speakers. And now we have time for questions. Some of them have been coming in. I'm sure there are a lot of questions that we can ask Melanie and Yaihara and Ashley, so feel free to send those in via the chat. Before we dive into questions, though, I wanted to share with you a couple of opportunities for you to engage through UCS. Many of you are probably familiar with some of the resources that we offer through the Science Network, such as webinars like these, but also our online videos and resources and networking events. But we're excited to announce that we're planning a mentorship program for early career scientists who are interested in science and policy. The program will pair you up with a mentor to provide support as you get more involved in science advocacy, and there will be some specialized skills building resources and opportunities for those who participate. But we're still trying to figure out, how to make this the most useful resource for all of you. So we need your input. If you're interested in helping us figure out what exactly this looks like, we're going to do some small Google Hangouts, run some ideas by small groups of early career scientists. Send us a comment in the chat box letting us know if you'd be interested in helping us out. We'd really appreciate it. UCS is also hiring. You can visit ucsusa.org/jobs. Read about some of the open positions that we have. And if you're going to the Tri-Societies Conference in November, we're hosting a communications workshop on November 9th. Again, just send us a note in the chat box if you're interested, if you'll be at the conference and you want to attend. Finally, we launched a LinkedIn group recently. You can find it on LinkedIn at UCS Science Network. Just type that into the little search box at the top. And that way you'll be able to connect with some more of our Science Network members. So we encourage you to join. So since I've been talking, we've gotten a few more questions in. So with that, let's kick it off. And let's start with the first question. Many of the current leaders in science policy, for example, leadership at OSTP, AAAS, NSF, first had long and extremely successful careers in science before they moved into policy. Do you see that trend continuing or changing? Whoever wants to take that one first is welcome to go for it.
So this is Ashley. As an early career scientist, I'm hoping that it's changing because I do not have a long career at the bench. And so I think that there are more spaces now for people to come in at younger stages and really contribute to the conversation as opposed to maybe working at a university, having a lab, and then transitioning into the policy realm.
I would agree with you, Ashley. This is Melanie. I think there are a lot of opportunities to engage on different levels. And as to the question of who the leaders of science policy will be, I really do think that for people who are leading policy for science, how the science and innovation enterprise works, the scientists who've been in the system are probably the ones who will continue to be the leaders because they understand the system, they know the people, they're trusted and credible. In the science for policy, the policy leaders in energy, environment, health, it's just important to remember that the political leaders and leaders of organizations will choose people that they trust and they believe have credible information. So actually that's why I think it's really important for scientists with a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different perspectives to consider going into science and consider going into policy. So that there are honest brokers and there are scientists with lots of different perspectives to contribute to the policy and political process.
This is Yaihara. I also agree with both Melanie and Ashley. I think for the time being, this trend will probably continue, but I really hope that in the near future, we start seeing changes to the way that this is happening.
All right, let's go to another question that seems very relevant since all of you are either current or past AAAS fellows. I'm very interested in completing a AAAS fellowship, but I know they are highly competitive. Is there anything you would recommend I do to make my application stronger? Are there other fellowships you would recommend? I think some of the other fellowships have already been talked about on the webinar, but any advice for someone who's interested in the AAAS fellowship?
This is Ashley. I would just make sure that you're able to tell your story. So why are you interested in the fellowship? Why are you interested in policy? And I think as long as you can relate your experience at the bench to what you want to do in terms of policy and how you would contribute, I think that telling that story is where sometimes we tend to fall short in making that connection, and that's where we lose people, which was mentioned in the first set of slides. You have to be able to communicate your interest, which ties together what you were trained to do, maybe what you're currently doing, and what you hope to do. And once you can tell that story, I think people are more inclined to listen and give you an opportunity to change realms or fields from maybe the traditional bench side to policy.
I couldn't agree more, Ashley.
I also agree with Ashley. I feel it's very important to tell your story. The other thing is for the AAAS fellowship in particular, they have the scoring system available. So for anyone that is interested in doing this fellowship, I will recommend them to go and look at the scoring system. One of the most important aspects of the application is the credentials of being a scientist. It's very important that you are a scientist in good standing and that you could support that with basically evidence like papers, depending on where you are in your career, what does that mean in your field. And like Ashley said, tell your story and show what makes you unique. What are you bringing to the fellowship that makes you you? I think that's very important to emphasize.
And I think that ties in with some of the skills that Yaihara was talking about, practicing your communication skills and making sure that you're doing a lot of networking and presenting at conferences. So, doing all the things you should be doing and just practicing them well. We have another question here from Josh. He asks, if after you dive into policy you decide you want to get back into science, is that possible? Do you see that transition as being smooth or would it be difficult?
This is Melanie. Since I had the dive in recommendation, I will take that. I think that you can actually keep a foot in both worlds and get into the pool and out of the pool at different times if you choose to do that. I would say that if you're going and doing something full-time in policy, like the AAAS Policy Fellowships, that's a full-time, although 1 to 2 year position, I would think about lining something up in advance and letting people know why you want to go do that. So for example, some of the people I know were there on sabbatical or had lined up postdocs that they were doing after the fellowship. But you can engage in policy anytime as an academic. You can be, there are professors who are advisors on a number of committees or even to elected officials. So you can balance both if that's what you choose to do.
All right, I will take another question then. We've gotten a few questions about folks who have PhDs but don't have any coursework in policy or any experience in policy. Would it be advisable to go to grad school and take some science policy classes, or would you recommend another pathway into the science policy world?
I can take that if nobody else would want. If you want to pass it, I just answered one. Ashley or Yaihara, did you want to take it? Hearing none, I will. I'll take it. This is Melanie. So I actually did take a little bit of science policy coursework and did a postdoc in science policy, and I was involved in doing policy work as a grad student. We actually started an organization that got scientists and public and policy makers together talking about big issues. And I would say both were helpful, but the most and the reason why the classes were really helpful is because it helped me understand the system, so that when I did go talk to Congress, I understood what they could do and what they couldn't do and how the process worked, and it helped me communicate my information in a more useful way. So I do think classes are useful, and you can also do a lot of reading to get yourself up to speed on that. But really the doing are things that I just couldn't learn in a book. I couldn't learn about the background of who cared about what, and practicing the interpersonal skills and negotiation and all of that. I just had to get out there and do it. So I think the experiential learning is even more important than classes, although classes are helpful.
I agree with Ashley. I was muted. Sorry for that. I'm sorry with Melanie. I was muted. I recommend to get involved in organizations at your school or institutions. There are a lot of opportunities to start learning policy when you are a grad student and a postdoc, but a lot of the time we overlook at them because we might be too busy. So, for example, getting in getting meetings with the deans of the university, trying to understand how are the policies that are affecting graduate school, etc. I think it's a very good way of starting to get your foot on the door and getting that experiential learning that Melanie was mentioning.
Thank you both. All right, we have a question from Jeffrey specifically for Ashley. He says, Ashley mentioned she began as an adjunct professor and wants to know, how does one do that? Ashley, can you talk a little bit specifically about that part of your career journey?
Yes. So during my postdoc, again, I was interested in working more with having an opportunity to kind of stay relevant with the science and stay up to date, as well as talking and explaining it to people. So for me, I reached out to local universities to see if there were adjunct opportunities. And while I was in graduate school, I taught during the summer for summer programs, so I had a little bit of experience. But once you have a PhD and you stepped into the postdoc realm, there are usually opportunities at local community colleges or universities for adjunct professors in your field. And sometimes it's ideal for postdocs because you may have an evening class that a full-time professor doesn't want to teach and they need that opportunity. So it puts you on a university campus. It helps you with really developing your statement, especially if you're talking to people who don't do science. If you want to do policy work, you have to be able to communicate what you do with lay audiences. And it's also, it helps to supplement your postdoc income. So I would reach out to local universities, go to their job site or the different departments that relate to your field of study to see if they have adjunct positions available for someone with a PhD.
Thanks, Ashley. We have another interesting question here. What kind of training do you wish you had before taking on your current role? Would you still have gotten a PhD? Yaihara, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yes. I would have loved to get trained in leadership. I feel leadership is one of those things that is never taught to you until you reach senior positions. And I wish that I would have had some training as an undergrad and also as a graduate student. Also communications, a lot of the techniques and strategies that I learned about science communication for non-scientific audiences, I had to do on my own and kind of like learning from other people. So I wish that we received more formal training during our scientific training on how to communicate our science better, how to present our science better, period. So those are the two that I want to share. And I want to hear what Ashley and Melanie have to say.
So this is Ashley. I think in addition to leadership, which this probably falls under that, I think the communication and the confidence to really step in and say your spill, say your story with people who are science and non-science. For me, I think a little more training with that in graduate school would have been helpful. A lot of my environments were in scientific environments, so there was a lot of networking for collaboration in terms of a project, but not networking for mentorship or for career growth. And so I think the more we have PhDs in different roles, the more you can serve as an example of options and opportunities, which allow you to kind of come back and communicate with other people that this is an avenue that you can explore. It has been done before, or here are areas where PhDs may not be working strongly but are needed. So for me, pieces of that, kind of those non-cognitive skills, I think would have been a little more helpful in making that transition, because it would have helped me feel a little stronger about making the transition, if that makes sense.
I agree with both of you. And actually, so ELIS really is about this. I started ELIS basically to help other people gain the skills that I wish that I had gotten in graduate school, and they're really all the ones that Yaihara mentioned during her comments earlier: communication, teamwork, negotiation, adaptability, leadership, like you said, and interpersonal skills. There are a number of resources for science communication for presentation, which are really helpful. And I think we could do even more in the area of interpersonal communication, how to manage up and how to manage others and how to negotiate, et cetera. So one good thing is that training and learning doesn't stop when graduate school ends. That I encourage you to all think about being lifelong learners and acquiring new skills and training as you need them, which I continue to do myself. But I agree with both of you that sort of the not the content as much as the process skills, almost like business school, things that you might learn in business school. You know, you graduate, even if you're in academia and you're running a lab, you've never done budgeting or managing or all of these other things. So kind of business school light skills are what I could have used before I went off into policy and other careers.
Great, thank you. We have time for a few more questions, so keep them coming. Next question comes from Joseph. He asks, how closely do the issues that you work on now correlate with your thesis research or what you got your PhD in? Do you feel like you've had the freedom to branch out a little bit? Ashley, maybe do you want to take that one first?
Yes. So my current, as in where I am right now, does not relate to my thesis work at all. I think that ties back into where you see yourself and what you want to do and how you tell your story to relate every experience. My thesis work, I have a PhD in biomedical research. I worked in a toxicology lab looking at benzopyrene and its effect, looking at resveratrol, which is a compound in red wine, its ability to offset benzopyrene's ability to form colon cancer. For me, that laid the foundation for the science interest. It helped me there's certain skills you develop as you're getting your PhD that are, they can cross and transfer over. They're transferable skills that we don't often think about. And from there, again, as I mentioned, working with mice, I wanted to work more with people. Working more with people, I realized I wanted to talk about science but not actually do some of the other day-to-day that comes along with having a lab. So then that prompted me to get more involved in science education because I noticed there were a lack of minorities and underserved populations, which then tied into increasing the numbers, so making a more inclusive environment. And that led me to broaden participation work at the Science Foundation. And though I work in engineering specifically, we do relate to the other aspects of STEM. So it allows me to keep or maintain my science, the S in STEM, while still working in the E portion of STEM.
Anyone else want to tackle that?
This is Yaihara. So I've been out of academia for now 4 years, and I haven't used my scientific background a lot in terms of things that are directly related to the positions that I have held in the last 4 years. So, but it's very important that I still use the skills that I learned on my PhD. I use the analytical skills, the problem-solving skills. Those skills I use on a regular basis. The topic of my dissertation, I probably haven't used it a lot in the last 4 years.
To add to that, I think that the AAAS Policy Fellowship offers opportunities for people who want to stay close to what they know and to branch out a lot. I did stem cell work, and I could have taken a position, for example, at NIH doing biobanking and how to store samples and things like that, or even stem cell policy in some cases, which was my specific policy area of expertise. I don't do that now, and actually when I was interviewing for positions, I could have done anything from energy policy to even working on women and children's refugee health. So the AAAS Fellowship really offers the opportunity to go in a new direction if that's something that you're interested in.
Great. We have one more question that I think is a really important one that I wanted to get to. And it's one that we hear a lot from graduate students. So how did your graduate mentor receive your interest in a career away from the bench? And what tips would you provide to those who are nervous about having that conversation?
This is Ashley. I can start that one. My mentor was encouraging and supportive, but he didn't know how to help me. So he encouraged me to seek out people who were doing what I wanted to do. Every fellowship or opportunity I came to him with to apply, he helped me with my application. But because he had only been a PI in a lab, that was the extent of his network. And so he couldn't make a phone call or call someone to try to help me transition into policy, but he was very supportive. I have several friends who have PhDs who took what was called the non-traditional track in terms of opportunities, and some of their mentors were very, very supportive, but again, didn't know how to support you, and some felt that you should have stayed at the bench. But I think what we're finding now is that the PhD allows you, they give you transferable skills. So it allows you to think critically, analyze things. A lot of things that we do at the bench, we utilize in an office setting and related to policy. And I think that we're understanding that it's not necessarily the content or what you specialize in with your PhD when you step into the policy world, but the way that you're taught to think that actually really contributes. Now, there are some technical things in terms, if you're working with certain topics, that your PhD helps you to understand and you can relate to, you can relay that information to the group, and that's definitely helpful. But I think it's what you're taught and how you're taught to think as a PhD that definitely helps and carries you into the different areas. So I think mentors are moving toward understanding that everyone is not excited about the bench, and part of that has to do with the examples that we see, because some of them are not excited about being at the bench. So there's a line, but there are a lot more resources now than there were a few years ago if your mentor is not as supportive as you would hope they were, or they're not as knowledgeable as you need them to be about policy.
This is Melanie. I have actually a good story about telling my PI that I wanted to pursue policy because I decided really early. By my second year, I knew I wanted to do it, and I was so nervous to tell my PI. And so I went into the office, and I had this whole whole spiel, and he just looked at me and said, okay. And what I've come to realize is, your PI is just a person just like you, and I told him why I wanted to do it, and I asked him for his help. Not that he could help me with policy career, but I said, I really think that I need to do X, Y, and Z to prepare for this career, and I would like your support to do that. I would like your permission to do that. And in return, we talked about, I think the really important thing is we talked about what he needed from me. So he was under, your PIs are under a lot of pressure to publish and to get grants and to get tenure, some of them. And so if you can understand what they need and how to help them achieve their goals, I think that they will, as a person, really want to do the same for you. And so the story goes, so he was permissive at first, and then one day my student group and I, we got a call from the governor-elect's office, and we ended up being asked to organize a stem cell policy panel. And I invited my whole lab, and as my boss and I were talking to this famous politician who was there, and as we were walking away, he kind of looked at me and said, I probably should start being nicer to you, because I have a feeling that someday soon you're going to be deciding my funding. So he went from being permissive to being really supportive of what I was doing, because I guess we did well at what we did.
I feel like that.
And I made sure to keep my lab work up to date. I was really productive in the lab, so that was another important thing.
I feel like that is a great story to start to wrap on. So before we hear those final words of advice from our presenters, as I promised you at the beginning, just wanted to thank you all for joining us and remind you that we'll be sending around the recording of the webinar and a list of the resources that we talked about today. I know there were a lot of questions that we didn't get to today as well. I think we'll probably discuss a lot of them in the mentorship program and in those Google Hangouts that I flagged. So again, feel free to send us a message in the chat box or follow up with us afterwards if you're interested in that. So to close out, Melanie, let's start with you. Your final word of advice for our attendees today.
Well, I guess I will just stick with what I said before, which is just to dive in, go for it. And the way that I dove in, I saw a hearing in my state legislature on a topic I cared about, and I went and I met the people who were working on it, and I volunteered to help. And that's how I got involved. So just dive in, show up, and ask people how you can help.
Perfect. Yaihara?
Yes, I will suggest to take ownership of your career and be very strategic in terms of planning and meeting people. And the other one is do not self-exclude and try to apply for opportunities that you might not feel you are the best fit, but try to focus on the skills that you have and what are you bringing to the table, and let others decide if you are not qualified for those.
Great. And Ashley?
So my words of advice would be to be patient and be open, which I think kind of echoes my colleagues. You want to be strategic, but you want to be patient with your career and your where you are. I think you should be open to opportunities that may not be exactly what you envisioned, but may actually be a good opportunity to set you up for the next stage. So even if you have this straightforward plan of X, Y, Z, just be open and flexible, because sometimes opportunities present themselves, or you get into a new space and you learn about something new that may be of interest to you. And if you are locked onto your one plan, you may miss out on those other opportunities to help increase your skill set, your portfolio, and just your overall exposure to different aspects of policy.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ashley, Yaihara, and Melanie. This was a great overview of career paths and policy public engagement. And thank you all for attending. We'll see you on the next webinar.
Thank you.